Hello and welcome into the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I'm joined by both of my co-hosts. I'm joined by Bryan Smith and by Greg Zumach. Boys, we are here to talk draft. I will kick it to Zumach first because you got to be exhausted, dude. You got to be, we're recording this on, today's Wednesday, and you've got to be just pooped.
I'm ready for 2025. I got one more in me, man. No, it's a little exhausting, and I appreciate folks kind of hanging with me. But I got to admit, I'm still fairly energized, and it's just that time of the year, man. I live for this.
I love it. Well, I'm glad you're energized because today we're talking all 20 draft picks the Cubs made over the past few days. We're going to break down each of them to varying degrees, but we'll hit on each of the 20 names. Bryan, how you feeling coming out of the 3-day draft?
I think being a Cubs fan is believing that pre-draft public rankings don't matter, because if you just read, what, I don't know, Baseball America or MLB.com has as the draft rankings, you might think, oh, I don't know, we didn't get enough top 200, top 300 guys. But, in the grand scheme of things, that doesn't matter. The scouts know their players far more than a writer who's trying to cover the whole country does. And I think it's a good time to sort of trust the process, appeal to authority a little bit, and believe that in the long run, if the Cubs got the guys they wanted, then those guys will outperform where they might be ranked, or in some cases not ranked at all.
If we latched on to what the rankings look like, we would still be upset about Cade Horton. So I think that we'll trust the scouts. You're right, and we'll go from there. But honestly, the three of us have spent the past few days during the draft just kind of consuming as much content about the Cubs' new draft picks as humanly possible. I know that Zumach, you probably had a head start on a few of these guys more than Bryan and I did, but we've just been consuming a whole lot of content. We're here to kind of break down each of these dudes, and really all we're going to do is we're going to sit here and we're going to go round by round. We're going to mention each one of these guys. I'll kick it to you guys. We'll provide some information about each of these draft picks, and we'll just get to know them a little bit more. So hopefully you guys out there listening are a little more educated on these players after these next 60 minutes or so. So 60 minutes, 20 players, we're on the clock now. So we'll start off with the Cubs' first-round pick that happened on Sunday night. We were live covering the draft on the Northsidebound YouTube page. The three of us were there as the pick for Cam Smith came in. Cam Smith was drafted out of Florida State. He is a third baseman, and he was kind of a pick that had been rumored to go to the Cubs for quite some time. He'd been mocked there several times, and I was excited to see the Cubs take Cam Smith at number 14 overall. Zumach?
Well, can I point out really quickly that in the past 2 years, Bryan Smith has been on that live stream, and last year he said it was going to be Matt Shaw, and this year he said it was going to be Cam Smith. So you can toss expert at me all you want, but Bryan's nailed it 2 years in a row. No, I think Cam Smith's really good. He's been a guy that we were talking about earlier in the year. I had graded him out as an above average third baseman earlier in the year. I think that, my question marks defensively a little bit later in the year might have been a byproduct. And I don't know if anything, but it's just the end of the year, the grind, the trying to play through anything you need to win a championship at Omaha. I'm not saying he's injured or anything like that. I just mean it's a grind towards the end of the season. A guy that you're evaluating in for the minor leagues in September, looking very different in April, doesn't mean that long term that guy isn't going to be back to that usual freshness and whatever. So I think Cam Smith answers a lot of questions. He's the mix of, he really hits everything the Cubs would necessarily want. It's the college performer, would look really, really good from a model standpoint. Hits all the batted ball data that in general related to whiffs, chase, and stuff like that. Hits the ball hard, while still having the upside of a guy that still has some development steps, though, if you want him to be an all-star. So he's kind of that mix of there's a really nice floor there, but they think that there's a ceiling.
Yeah, I think that Cam Smith is an interesting case where he's very clearly a big dude. They seem to believe in him defensively, believe in the athleticism, believe in the kind of lateral quickness for him to stay at third base. But yeah, he's a big dude that probably still has to see some swing changes during his pro career. Bryan, what'd you think about Cam?
Yeah, what jumped out to me about what Dan Kantrovitz said to the media afterwards is that they've been on Cam since he was a shortstop in high school. And, I think one of the things that tells them is that he has that innate athleticism that has been honestly probably sapped a little bit with the way that Florida State prioritized bulking him up so much. And I think what the Cubs will probably look to do is add some agility back into it and allow him to be that athlete, because I think he's got enough strength to be the player they want him to be offensively with where he is right now. Just try to make him a little more fluid. And as far as swing changes go, yeah, I think there's some stuff they can do there. He starts with his hands really low. He comes into the zone really flat. And so he didn't quite hit for as much power as I think you would think someone with his profile would. So I think the Cubs will be able to sort of find a balance of adding a little more power while not taking away too much in the hit tool that he showed this year. So yeah, nice blend of like production with some low hanging fruit, I think, that they can improve upon, and clearly a really good, fun kid. Just hearing his interview with Marquis after he was drafted and his connection to the organization, really seems like a really great guy.
The vibes were off the chart with Cam Smith in his interview with the glasses on, and just the vibes were incredible. When I looked at Cam Smith, and after watching quite a bit of him and reading about him, the way that I described him soon after the draft, and I promise I mean this as a compliment, and I'm comparing him to another recent draft pick, is just a more refined, more athletic, and more talented version of Jordan Wogu when he was drafted by the Cubs. Different, like it's different. I mean, don't look at Jordan Wogu's stats for the past couple of years. That's not my point. My point is that when you look at Cam Smith, it's like he needs a little bit of a swing change in the same way Wogu did. He's a big dude that's athletic like Wogu was. The pops there, like I place emphasis on refined, athletic, and more talented. Like all those things are there for Cam Smith compared to Jordan Wogu, but like the starter pack is there compared to what I've seen, what I saw with Jordan Wogu when he was drafted back in 2020.
Yeah, I can see that.
All right. Anything else that you guys want to hit? I guess with Cam Smith, might as well talk about this. Where do you guys? I know it's early. We still want to see him in pro ball. What are you guys' thoughts on where you would rank him compared to? We talked about that big seven, the top seven in the Cubs organization, ending up with Jefferson Rojas and Kevin Alcantara at numbers 6 and 7. Where would you kind of rank Cam Smith in that mix? Would you rank him after the mix? Would you mix him into that top 7? Where does he fit in, Bryan?
The more I thought about it in the couple days after we drafted him, is I was thinking about Jefferson Rojas and Kevin Alcantara, two fellow right-handed hitters, two guys that you're sort of dreaming on with the power to come later in their career. And I got to the point of thinking, are we hoping that Jefferson Rojas and Kevin Alcantara develop to a point offensively in the next 12 months that they are where Cam is right now? And that made me, when I sort of did a quick ranking the other day, it made me put Cam above them and put him 6th in the system, because, I think you can argue the ceiling with all three of them. He might be the lowest of those three, but, it's not by much. But I think in present talent ability, he is probably the top of those three offensively right now.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that was extremely well articulated, probably better articulated than I would view it. Anywhere from 6 to 8 for me. He is a guy that I think still has some questions, that all three have questions. They would be in the same tier for me, definitely, with the thought of, and I think I even answered this exact question yesterday, and I think I said 8, but in many ways, I think Bryan articulated that so well that internally is what I would view. He is a guy that probably, I'm hoping, but I really think that looks tremendously different even next April. I think you let him keep doing generally what he's doing, make minor changes, if at all, for the rest of this year, let him get his feet wet in affiliated ball, work with him in instructs, and then I think you see really what you got cooking next year.
Yeah, I'd probably be more conservative and just place him 8th in the system as of right now. But like you guys said, I think that you could probably go as high as, I don't know, 5 or 6. But I'd put him 8 right now, and then we'll see what he does once he hits pro ball, see how he makes those adjustments to his swing, and then I can always crank him up the list and early next year. That'll be fun. One thing I wanted to try to hit on with each of these guys before I move on. where do you kind of see him? Do you see him making his full season debut this season? And where do you kind of project him to start off the year? I want to talk timeline with Cam Smith, because with Cam Smith, it's important that we're coming off a year in which Matt Shaw was drafted 13th overall, and then made his way all the way up to AA in his draft season. And now he's way advanced in terms of his timeline. We talk about like there's a potential that he debuts in Chicago later this year. That's a super, super, super fast timeline. That's not going to happen with Cam Smith. I think it's a little bit of a slower progression with him. But where do you see him this year and then next year for Cam Smith, Bryan?
Yeah, I think they'd love to get him on the field this year just to get some video on him and things like that. But the key is probably a South Bend starting assignment next year, and then the hope would be that he adjusts pretty quickly, gets to a point of dominating that level, and finishes the year in AA in 2025. And then if that goes really well, then you could ask 2026 Major League questions, but more likely probably 2027.
Yeah, I think more of a reasonable college first-round draft pick timeline as opposed to a Matt Shaw college first-round draft pick timeline is fair.
Yep.
Yeah, I think they could be a little bit more aggressive on the early end, but in many ways, Matt Shaw forced the issue. Like, he just was hitting so well in South Bend that they had to be having internal questions about, like, are we just holding this guy back arbitrarily? And so, you promote him to AA. I don't think there's a need to get Cam Smith in AA this year. If he hits in Myrtle Beach for the rest of the year, just to kind of get his feet wet, if he happens to make it to South Bend, great. At the end of the day, I just want him to kind of get some reps, get some work in under him, work with some of the hitting coaches, see if he kind of gravitates towards one or the other. That may play into it too. I don't think that you want to force the issue, but if there happens to be hitting coaches that you feel like he could very specifically benefit from working individually with them, then, maybe that may sway some of the conversation.
All right. Round 2, pick number 54 overall. The Cubs drafted Cole Mathis. They selected him as a third baseman out of the College of Charleston. He's a right-handed hitter, right-handed thrower. I think that this Cole Mathis pick is kind of the start of a theme. I mean, honestly, Cam Smith was probably the start of a theme of big dudes. Cole is really one of the smaller guys that they drafted. I think he's listed at 6'1" and close to 200 pounds. Cole Mathis is a big dude. He makes great in zone contact rates, doesn't chase much, and posts good exit velocities. That's a theme throughout this entire draft class, right? Right, Zumach? What are your thoughts on Cole Mathis and his selection, being a third baseman, being a first baseman, being potentially an outfielder? I know he was a two-way player at the College of Charleston. Probably not that. I mean, actually, Dan Kentrovitz came out and said definitely not that. He won't be a two-way guy. Bryan, what are your thoughts on Mathis?
Yeah, when I first started watching video of him, you see the power projection that they want to have for him, but he's certainly not striking physically in any way. He doesn't there's really no part of his body when he's wearing a uniform that jumps out. And it reminded me of Michael Busch, who he actually has the same height and weight listing of, and where it's,
okay.
Obviously we're talking about righty hitter versus a lefty hitter in Busch, but the way they fill out a uniform is really similar. And then when you hear the positional plan with Mathis, like a first baseman that they're going to try at third base, that sounds like what Michael Busch sounded like coming out of college. So it was interesting to me to see those parallels pretty quickly. But, I think this is one where Mathis's numbers, advanced numbers as far as chase and in zone contact and all that stuff, that jumped off the page. And then you throw in the Cape Cod League power performance last summer, and the Cubs are willing to take a bet that this is a guy who could check both the hit tool and the power tool, and maybe in the end be a player with similar offensive performance to Michael Busch.
It felt like the entire draft class played at the Cape Cod League this past year, even the high schoolers. I don't know. All 20 guys were on the Cape. So, Zumach, what's your thoughts right off the bat with Cole Mathis?
No, I think it's exactly, how Bryan articulated that again. The chase rate, I think, is huge. That was something that the Cubs feel like they made a very tangible change to their model. I don't know if they did. Obviously, I have no idea on that. but they started to identify guys who make contact, but then also don't chase a lot. And that isn't Matt Shaw last year. Like Matt Shaw could make some and he has made some improvements with regard to chasing out of the zone. But that was probably the one knock on him, is that or defensively or whatever. And this year, that's not the case. Like the heavy bulk, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, the heavy bulk of these college hitters just didn't really expand the zone very much. Cole Mathis didn't expand the zone. He had a chase rate of like 16%. And realistic college average for like actual guys who might get drafted in the first 5 rounds is about like 23-24%. So he just isn't expanding the zone very much. That being said, maybe one of the criticisms I would make here is the fact that he actually had a fairly low swing percentage, and he's going to need to be more aggressive in pro ball, because you can get away with that at the college level. This isn't a knock on college baseball in the slightest, or the conference that he played in, but there are just going to be more non-competitive pitches that you can just basically say, I'm just not swinging at that. And in professional ball, as you move up the ladder, there will be more and more competitive pitches in which you need to be more aggressive. That if that ball maybe isn't your like 10 out of 10 swing no matter what, this is exactly my zone, my pitch, exactly where I want it right now, you have to still be willing to take more aggressive swings early on. And so that's probably my one knock on him. Asking around about the league, or to the league, sometimes I didn't even need to do that. I just had people coming into my messages and kind of shooting me message evaluators that I really trust. They were like, love Cole Mathis. Thought that was an amazing pick. There were some folks that had asked around to their respective, to the teams they cover and the scouts they cover, who had seen Mathis and even had said, like, I think he can play all 4 corners really well. So I still question the third base. I mean, I think I do, but it was at least kind of cool to hear that from people who have seen him, and far more than I have.
You guys have any objections to the idea that he might start off this year in Myrtle Beach and, like Cam Smith, be in South Bend to start off the 2025 campaign?
I think that's probably right. Yeah, I mean, Myrtle Beach will be really comfortable for him given
Yes.
where he played college baseball and stuff. So it's a nice landing point to put him in front of some friends and family early on.
I think that's another theme. I think Sam Wiederhaft is going to have a fun time with all these draft picks this season. So that's going to be exciting. Let me go ahead and group the third round draft pick and fourth round draft pick together. The Cubs selected with the 90th overall pick, Ronny Cruz, who is a high school shortstop from Miami Christian School in Florida. He is switch hitter, maybe right-handed hitter. And then they also selected in the fourth round, the 120th overall selection, Ty Southisene. Am I pronouncing that right, guys? I think Ty Southisene.
I think so. I'm not sure.
He is a shortstop from Basic High School in Nevada. Plenty of jokes going around about the high school name. That's always fun. But yeah, I mean, I think it's fun to see a couple of high school shortstops go off the board. Both, I think they're kind of different scenarios, right? Where Ronny Cruz is a super, super young guy. He's not yet 18 years old. I kind of view him in a lot of ways like an international free agent signing. I guess he is originally from the Dominican Republic, then took residence in Florida. And so that's why he's drafted here. Ty Southisene is another guy where it's like, he's not really like that raw, like he's good bat to ball skills. He's a super small guy, right? 5'9". I think he's listed at $170. Small guy. But what are you guys' thoughts on these kind of probably overslot guys, both these overslot guys more than likely?
Yeah. So I don't know about the slot on Cruz. But I will say this is the prime example of the situation in which do not worry about the rankings.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had people that were sending me angry messages because he's 519 on Future Star Series. They do great work. I'm not knocking that at all. But especially for these day 2 guys, I throw the rankings completely out the window. And the reason for that is very clear here. If a team and a scout feels that they have got a hidden gem, they are not going to want to talk about him. Asking around, I did not get day 2 names, like from anybody. Nobody wants to tell me their day 2 names. Like somebody that you can pop that you feel like is an absolute gem. You're not sharing that information. Day 3, like, yeah. Like, I like this guy. That's totally different. So Ronnie Cruz very, very, very much felt like the Cubs did a massive amount of homework on him. and probably got a little lucky that his showing at the MLB Draft Combine wasn't more widely picked out, but that may have factored into why they needed to take him in the third, because he may have had some suitors there pretty quickly.
Bryan, you were taking a look at Ronnie Cruz's swing yesterday.
Yeah, Kantrovitz mentioned in his press conference that that Ronnie started the spring off pretty slow with a knee injury, and I think the Cubs kind of like players like that the heat's not really there at the beginning, because sometimes I think the bloom can come off the rose with prospects, like based on the first month. And I think the Cubs really like to scout right down to the deadline. And I think what they saw in Ronnie Cruz, and what I saw just from some Twitter videos, basically, is a guy that really improved his swing from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. What you see is much more balance, a much better, faster bat speed, frankly. And I mean, this is a kid that is 17 years old, that's just beginning to sort of have the frame that he's going to have going forward, and will put on a lot of muscle with the Cubs. And so I think if they see the growth is possible that quickly in the span of a couple months, that they're going to say, okay, he's just going to keep growing and keep growing. He's somebody that can take instruction, and the body's getting to a very like first round caliber body. Like, we're going to take a bet on that. And yeah, if I had to guess, I would guess he actually comes in above slot, even though this is a guy that was drafted far ahead of where people thought he would be. Switching
over to Southisene, I'm intrigued by him. If I'm throwing another, not a player outcome comp, but some other player that reminded me of Southisene at the time that they were acquired, I mentioned Yaisen Santana, who I know, again, another guy who was not good results with the Chicago Cubs once he was acquired. But in the fact that Yaisen Santana, when he was first acquired by the Cubs in that Yu Darvish trade a few years back, was a guy that was swinging out of his shoes, but he was still kind of lauded for his high contact ability. And that's when I'm watching videos of Ty Southisene, the dude's swinging hard. But every comment I've seen is that, like, he makes contact really, really well. Like, don't focus on the pop, focus on the feel it hits. And it's like, I'm watching him. It doesn't really it doesn't add up, right? It's the swing doesn't match the abilities, I feel like. But I don't know. I look at Ty Southisene, given his size, maybe he's a second base. He's listed as shortstop. Maybe he's a second baseman. Getting into some power is going to be super, super important for him, I feel like.
Yeah, I think the Cubs here see a guy that if he went to college, he goes to Tennessee, probably becomes sort of the heartbeat of one of the most important programs in the country. And, when he comes out of college in a couple of years as a first or second round pick, and the Cubs think, okay, there's some arbitrage there that we're getting by taking him in the fourth round, probably giving him a bonus that, is above slot, but nothing obscene that's eating too much of their pool. And so they see that as sort of positive asset value. And yeah, I mean, the question will definitely be if he can impact the baseball enough to make it at the high levels. But, what you hear so far is really good fielder, really good hands, really good person, and leader. And I think the Cubs are willing to make that investment. And, if he's a guy that ends up with a fringe slug, well, it's not somebody you put a first round, Nick Madrigal, 4th overall pick sort of resources into. It's just a 4th rounder. And, I think they're willing. It makes sense that they'd be more willing to take the power gamble there.
Zumach, there's been plenty of Nick Madrigal thrown around as soon as he was drafted. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, like, Nick Madrigal was one of the weirdest outliers that we've seen in baseball, but also a guy that was probably picked at the absolute last year before we really, within baseball, were evaluating batted ball numbers in the same manner. And so, if Nick Madrigal is coming out of the draft this year, he's probably not going 4th and is probably not drawing as much ire. As far as the comp to Southisene, it's within the realm of possibility, and that wouldn't be a bad outcome.
It'd be a good outcome.
It would be a great outcome, right? That would be good. I know Nick Madrigal gets a ton of flack, and good, bad, whatever, or justified, not justified, who cares? But he definitely draws a lot of ire from Cubs fans because of the implications and the acquisition cost and how that all came about. But if Ty Southisene is doing that, you actually feel like that's a pretty good outcome. The other thing that I will say, though, really quick, is that, like, when you ask around about him, though, it's not phrased in the same way as Nick Madrigal. Nick Madrigal was described in 2018 as like a guy who was just really adept, just incredible contact, placement. You didn't hear the same words thrown around. And Ty Southisene, like, explosive. I realize that we're not seeing a ton of that from a power development yet, but like those are the type of like twitchy, explosive, those are the type of terms being used. And who knows how that ultimately develops, but like that's just a different way of viewing a guy. And if we have to like project where people are going in the 4th round, I am happy to take a gamble on a guy that people really loved playing with, by the way. That's the other thing, like on the showcase circuit, folks were like, he was the best player on our team. And then they listed like who else is on the team. And I was like, those are some really good players. But like explosive, twitchy, that's the type of gamble that I would make, especially one that drew the interest of an incredible program like Tennessee.
I think that in both of these high school shortstops being drafted, we're seeing them. They'll go to Arizona and spend the rest of the year in Arizona this season. Ronnie Cruz probably starts and spends most of the year in Arizona again next year would be my guess. And then Ty Southisene, I don't know. Maybe he makes it up to Myrtle Beach to start off the year. Maybe later in the year. I think that there's more of an expectation of Myrtle Beach probably for him than Ronnie Cruz would be my guess.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Cruz especially feels like he'll follow the track of Jaquil Melendez, what he's doing this season, and spend all of next year in Arizona.
Yep.
Yep.
All right. With the 5th round pick at number 153 overall, the Cubs selected Ariel Armas, who is a catcher from the University of San Diego. We know guys that were drafted from the University of San Diego named Chris Bryant. That's always super fun. Ariel Armas just seems like a defensive stud. Like it seems like defense. I mean, he won Conference Defensive Player of the Year. Everything I've seen is that defensively he is terrific. Zumach, I'll kick it to you first on your thoughts on the Cubs selecting Armis. The first thing I'll go to is he's a catcher. The catching position is weird in the Cubs system, right? Because you can look at the major league team and say the catching position is not very good, but you can also look at the catching throughout the entire organization and be like, there's not a whole lot of like great depth or great talent there at catcher throughout the organization. So like, yeah, you're not drafting based on major league need. You're sometimes on occasion drafting based on system-wide need, but Ariel Armas is just like a defensive stud.
That was the vibes that Dan Cantervid said. He is a guy that they've taken swings like this before. They've taken guys like Casey Opitz in 2021, I believe, where just, and unfortunately Opitz has dealt with some injuries and just hasn't quite progressed, but like you kind of just take this middle of day 2 type of a guy that you think, you know what, like if we could identify a backup catcher, and like what Cantervid said, there are very few people in a given year, very few players that they identify and say, we actually think that this person defensively has the chops to make it as a major league catcher. That if you feel like you can get one of those guys in round 5 and just take a swing and do it every couple of years, and if you get lucky, you get one. These are the type of profile of guys who could spend 12 years in the major leagues, be like an Austin Hedges type of a guy that just is constantly just earning his keep as a major league catcher.
I think the other thing that's worth thinking about as for fans is that what doesn't happen in the draft room necessarily when the 5th round pick comes up is they're not saying who is the best player that we can get in the 5th round. It's part of an overall strategy. And what they're more likely saying, we don't know what the bonus is here for Armis, but I'm going to speak as if he's an underslot guy because that's what I believe. So what happens, I think, in the draft room is, hey, who's got $100,000 guy that they really like? Or 150,000 or 50,000, whatever it ends up being. And the scouts that have done their homework that actually have sort of nailed down these guys to have a specific bonus number in mind, then have the authority to speak up and say, hey, I saw this guy 7 times. I really liked him and he'd be really good in our system. And that's how these types of players, I think, end up getting drafted. And yeah, the Cubs have some need for catching in the system. And I think it's a good system fit, even if sort of the upside here is less than some other guys you're going to see in the 5th round. So like, please don't send us in 2 years like, I can't believe this guy who got drafted in the 6th round, like the Cubs drafted Armis instead of that guy. Like, it's just not how it works.
Yeah, that's a really good example here with Armis. I probably looking at a Myrtle Beach this year, South Bend next year, but like he's especially tricky, I think, as far as kind of pegging where he's going to end up this year, next year, the year after, just because of his profile is just different than some of these other, I guess, more traditional development paths for these guys that you're focused on the bat. So that'll be worth
Another thing to consider even is I'm totally fine if he doesn't even play affiliated ball this year.
Yeah.
They may very well stick him and the other catcher that they took down in Arizona and just work with pitchers who aren't going to be an affiliated ball, but just work in Arizona. And that would be completely fine.
That'd be a good mix down there of rehabbing older guys and super, super young guys and recent draft picks. So I don't know. That'd be fun too. I'm with you. All right, 6th round, the Cubs selected at 182 overall, Ryan Gallagher, who is a right-handed pitcher from UC Santa Barbara. Back-to-back picks here coming up from UC Santa Barbara. He was the conference pitcher of the year in his conference this past year. Zumach, what are your thoughts right off the bat with Ryan Gallagher?
This is the type of and I don't think this is necessarily related, but this is the type of swing that like Cleveland took. And I'm not calling him Shane Bieber because of the UCSB connection here, but it's this identification of what do we do as an organization well from a pitching development. And that is definitely, it's adding velocity, which is funny, which is crazy to say. Like if we were to go back several years ago and say, oh, the Cubs are just known for like adding a tick or two of velo for the majority of their pitchers in the minor leagues, you would just been laughed at. They just did not do that at the time. And they have done that here. There's good and there's bad with that. And I think that there's a balance, but like that is something that they've done. Adding control to a guy outside of Jackson Wiggins, which I feel like may be a more separate situation that they may not be as related to. They haven't really been as good about that. Ryan Gallagher has very, very good control. He's got kind of a deeper repertoire. And there's some interest there. I'm going to try to pull up his pitches here so I don't talk out of turn. But, I mean, it's a fairly deep repertoire. I'll kind of do that as we go along.
Yeah.
I definitely still have some questions overall. I'll kick it to Bryan while I'm pulling up some data here.
Bryan, I think that you're looking at with Ryan Gallagher, there's a spectrum of the Brandon Birdsell and Connor Nolan from a couple of years ago and guys that were drafted in this general range, but this general profile, right? I mean, very, very general profile. And then you have the other spectrum, and they've been those guys have been very, very successful making their way up to AAA. You have the other spectrum, which is the draft picks of what are we sitting 8 years ago now, 6 years ago, where you had the Alex Langs, the Brendan Littles, like that era of pitcher that actually both those guys ended up making MLB debuts, but that's besides the point. There was that era of drafting these kind of lower upside pitchers from college versus the Brandon Birdsell and Connor Nolans. Where does Ryan Gallagher kind of fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, that's interesting because the two guys they drafted in the top 10 rounds, Ryan Gallagher, and we'll talk about Brooks Caple later, but two guys that are from small schools that were like, they're conference pitchers of the year this year. In Caple's case, like a 3rd-team All-American. And that's different than Connor Nolan. I mean, that Connor Nolan, you argue like a guy who's like seasoned in the SEC. These are guys that I think the Cubs are saying because of where they pitched might have been slightly undervalued, or probably more specifically didn't quite get the pitching instruction that they're about to get in professional ball. And so probably is like, an R&D led pick in addition to what the scouts really liked that tells them that they can make some real improvements here.
Zumach, you got a pitch repertoire for Ryan Gallagher?
Yeah, I do. Not focusing too much on the specific numbers because anytime you're talking about a small school, you're going to have less data points. So I think I only have like 220 something fastballs here. But what I do want to point out is that really quick. So there's vertical movement, there's velocity. Those are like the two big things that we look at, but it's so much deeper than that. But this isn't a data podcast. So like the thing I really want to call out are two things. The velocity isn't very high. It's sitting like 90 effectively for a fastball. And like we talked about, that's not ultimately really going to cut it very well. But what he does have is an average induced vertical break. So that's the amount of carry on a fastball of over 20 inches, which is a lot. It's a lot of carry on that ball. You're going to still need to add some velocity there. And the issue with college ball is that him having over 20 inches doesn't mean that same number is going to carry over to minor league ball, to carry over to major league ball.
Different baseballs, yeah.
It's definitely different baseballs. So it's going to drop a couple inches. I was talking to Lance Brzezowski, who always, he uses like 2 inches effectively difference from college down to like the minor leagues, and then about 2.5 inches to the major leagues. So Lance, if you're watching, I think that I might be paraphrasing you there, but that's kind of what we're talking about.
Also, shout out to Lance for his work on MLB Network during the draft.
He was awesome.
Yeah,
he was awesome. So you take that like 22 inches that Gallagher's getting, you drop it down a little bit. It's still really good. And so you add that, you add maybe a tick of velocity, you add a changeup. I think Ryan Gallagher is an interesting R&D cat, like Brian was saying. Also, I'm pretty sure the brother of a local comedian down in LA, Paige Gallagher. I might be wrong on that. But
that is why people are tuning into this show.
This is it.
That's the goods.
So Ryan, Paige, if you happen to be watching, Paige, don't write a joke about me. Whether you're related to him or not, please don't do it. But other than that, I thought it was kind of a weird note to mention.
All right, let's move on to the 7th round, where the Cubs went back to UC Santa Barbara, this time to get an outfielder in Ivan Brethowr. He is a big boy. He's a big boy. He can swing it. This is a bat, right? This is a bat. Again, back to the really good in zone contact rate. Really good numbers as far as chase go, I believe. Exit velocities are great, which is not shocking given his size. Dude, this is maybe the most fun pick for me in the entire draft. Brian, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, this is just you want to watch this guy take batting practice, and you want to hope that the strikeouts are within reason, and the rest should sort of take care of himself. I mean, this is probably along the lines of like a Felix Stevens in the system, who's having a really nice 2024, and but the Cubs hope that there's a little more polish around the edges, and he's definitely a better athlete from what it seems than Felix is. And so, but we're talking about that type of power, a guy that you can dream on hitting 30 homers in the bigs, and then you just work on refining everything else. And he's probably a guy that spends a large part of the season in Myrtle Beach next year, but if he somehow sort of hits his way out of there, then you consider it a huge success year one.
Yeah, Chase is about average, which is, and like Dane Kinjovitz kind of talked about this. That's fine. I mean, honestly, he even said you again, paraphrasing, that you kind of expect a guy with this amount of power to chase more, just because he can still do damage on pitches that other people in his lineup necessarily can't. And so like you can expect a little bit of chase. I do expect that they kind of tone things down a little bit. I love taking a swing on this, pun very much intended here, in the 7th round. Like, this is the type of guy that the range of outcomes is pretty wide, but like, shoot, if you hit pretty well, like, then this is a great pick.
You guys think we could see him in Myrtle this year?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I guess it just kind of depends on like space outlets,
Yeah.
But him being able to play the outfield actually fairly decently well, I think helps a lot.
We're 7 rounds in here, and then we're going to speed up a little bit more for these next several, the rest of the selections. But I think this is a good stopping point, because we talked about Cam Smith and where he ranks in the system in terms of prospects, more than likely around that 6 to 8 range. Of the guys rounds 2 through 7 that we just covered, are there any other guys there that are top 30-ish guys in the system, top 40, top 50? I know that Brian, you had some thoughts on some of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cole Mathis is very firmly, a top 20 guy. I think you could argue about his specific spot, probably as high as 12 and probably as low as, the early 20s or something like that. I think I put him at 14 when I sort of ballparked it the other day. I think Ronnie Cruz would rank the next highest for me, even though that's bucking consensus a little bit. I just think the upside there is really huge. I think it's higher than Southisene's. And then Ivan in the 7th round would be the other guy that would crack a prospect list for me. I think Armis and Gallagher are more sort of gut feel guys for scouts and lesser prospects off the bat than Ivan is. And I think we'll probably come to 3 more players as we go down the draft list that would factor into prospect ranking conversations for me. But at this point, it's not sort of linear with draft position.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Mathis is a definite for me. I think that everything he's shown, all the boxes that he's ticked, and where he ultimately projects, I think he is a no doubt top 30 prospect. And I think that Brian's kind of outlay on where he might fit, fits pretty well. Cruz is a fun guy. He is super high upside. I don't know where to rank him. I honestly need to reflect on that. I think that a top 30 ranking is very well justified, but also to me, he's almost like an international free agent signing with a smidge more data, because I can actually look at things in the MLB draft combine. And so I honestly just need to reflect on that. I could very much see that he would be a guy that I would rank, while I wouldn't rank like a guy like Fernando Cruz, even though Cruz is very well thought of and could totally justify that. So I just need to reflect on it. But I would also agree there's probably just a handful of other players that one we're going to get to on day 2 here that I would have in the conversation for top 30, 40 picks or prospects.
Yeah. What's going to be really cool is if you go see the Cubs in spring training next year and you go to the backfields and you go to the field that is like the farthest away players, you might be able to see infield practice and at shortstop that involves Angel Cepeda, Derniche Valdez, Fernando Cruz, Ronnie Cruz, Ty Southisene, Arandis Ramon, maybe. I mean, there's like 6 to 8 really like interesting shortstops. And I think the Cubs bet on that group is like, obviously not all of them are going to even reach AA probably, but if 1 or 2 guys really hits, then that's the kind of thing that can roll this system over and continue to have success later in the decade.
It's the same conversation we were having about a year ago with Jefferson Rojas and Christian Hernandez and Alexis Hernandez. And I mean, and we even kind of threw Pedro Ramirez into that group where it's like that was that group. And it's like, if 1 or 2 of them hit and keep progressing pretty nice, and that's nice. And then that's what you just mentioned is like the next group of middle infielders for sure. All right, let's keep going on this draft class. In the 8th round at number 242 overall, the Cubs selected Edgar Alvarez, who is a first baseman from Nicholls State. He is another big boy. Brian, what's your thoughts on the big boy from Nicholls State?
Yeah, I mean, a data monster, a guy who's been in college a long time. The Cubs have probably followed him through JUCO ball, then to Nicholls State. Yeah, the data jumps off, but a guy that another kind of gut feel scout guy that probably is going to clock in at a lower bonus. So, somebody that his area scout really likes and also definitely got to know well enough to sort of get a pre-draft agreement, I would imagine.
Yep. Big data, small school, interesting dude. I can't comment on signability, but I imagine I would be very surprised if there's any issues. And yeah, I would imagine it's a lower amount. A Will Swoop pick, but not Billy Swoop, actually. His son, Will Swoop, is a scout for the Cubs. So just kind of an interesting little note there. But hey, I will trust a Swoop draft pick regardless of the first name.
I think that Edgar Alvarez has a good chance of being a fan favorite in the system, just because of how he looks at the plate, how he swings. The swing is pretty. I think the swing's real pretty. So he could be a prospect fan favorite. In the 9th round, the Cubs selected Brooks Caple, who, Brian, you already mentioned, at 272 overall. He was also Conference Player of the Year this past year at Lamar, put up just pretty insane numbers across the board. What do you like about Brooks Caple, Brian?
Yeah, big kid, shows some feel for a changeup in the video that I watched. So, kind of, I don't know, reminding me of like Duncan Robinson a little bit, that type of Cubs prospect from the past. You think about just how many independent league pitchers the Cubs have signed this year and how far they've had to dip into that well. Like getting a couple of guys that are definitely ready to come in and be like full-fledged starting pitchers to round out the 2025 minor league rotations is important. And Caple looks like certainly ready to fill a role there, ready to eat 100 innings next year. And but still has some pretty interesting upside, I think.
Yeah, real quick, also gets a lot. I mean, very little data on him, but like the fastball, very similar, kind of lower velo from what I saw, but he's touched higher from what I've heard. Gets good carry on it. I've heard that it's been a little bit higher than what they have kind of the data on. And then the other thing I want to note is that it's not plus extension, but he does get a little bit more extension. So like throwing the ball, releasing the ball a little bit closer to the plate. And again, that's based on just the data I have. So it's very possible that they have a little bit more on there, but just kind of something to watch as we go forward.
We've reached the end of the day 2 picks in the 10th round, where the Cubs selected Matt Halbach at number 302 overall. He is a third baseman from UC San Diego, which I believe was Tyler Durna's. I believe that's where Tyler Durna went to school, was UC San Diego. I think I saw you mention, Zumach, that he had potential to be a much higher pick had injuries not slowed him down this past season, right?
That's how I've kind of viewed it. He was a guy that was on my watch list in like November, December when he did really well on the Cape. He had great data from the previous year. I don't think let me just say that I think his range of outcomes, there's at least a sliver of possibility that he could have been kind of like a Cole Mathis, where he's a guy that's like, it's a smaller school. He tore up the Cape. He just hit really well. He's got all the data. He's kind of a tweener, like defensively, although I actually don't think that's the same thing with Halbach. And he's just a guy that you're like, he adds to the floor of our organization really, really well. Hopefully everything kind of really clicks. Hoback at least maybe had that within a range of possibilities. He looked really good for the first, I think it was 19 games this season, and then was out for the rest of the year, but he was back for the combine. So I actually really like the Halbach pick. That's one of my favorite picks of the entire year. And I think that there is a possibility that I don't know the injury stuff, but at least he's back. So that's good. I think that there is at least a possibility that we look back on that one and say, yeah, man, that was a heck of a 10th rounder. Kind of like we did a couple years ago with Brody McCullough.
Yeah, I was going to say, Bryan, he seems like a guy that is closer to Cole Mathis than the 2nd round to 10th round gap makes it seem.
Yeah, I mean, similar body types. I guess the difference is that Mathis was able to find the power to show scouts in college, and Halbach hasn't gotten there yet. I mean, if you combine college and summer leagues, he's got 214 games and only 18 home runs. So the Cubs definitely think they can unlock some power to make that work. But this is a Cape Cod League pick. I mean, this is a pick, he didn't play a ton this spring, but last summer in the Cape, he hit 364, 455, 512, one of the better players there. And so the Cubs definitely had that in mind all season. We're not that worried. No matter how 2024 was going to go, they were going to have him, on an interest list at whatever level he sort of properly, or whatever round projection he properly fit in at.
Unsurprisingly, in the 11th round, the Cubs selected a high school guy that will probably be an overslot guy. They went with Eli Lovich out of Blue Valley West High School in Kansas. He's a left-handed hitter. He's an outfielder that he will just go straight to strength and conditioning with the Cubs and just start putting on all sorts of muscle, because there's plenty to put on. Big 6'6" frame, but I think he's listed at 185, and so 6'6", 185 is he's got some work to do in the gym, that's for sure.
And I don't think he's 185.
Yeah, I don't want him to go to the gym. I want him to go to the buffet. Like we've got a little bit to go before that. No, Lovich is fun again. Yeah.
I think it's a very, very raw, like Owen Casey starter pack when Owen Casey was drafted.
Yeah, I mean, to Greg's point, like he has the fun career where he's just going to be told to eat for 2 years, everything and anything, and then convert that to muscle, and then you hope. I think what the Cubs see here is a guy that plays with a lot of feel, where players his height at his age generally really, really struggle with feel. I mean, I think, we all knew the tallest kids in our grades in high school who just always sort of moved awkwardly. And this is not that. This is a guy that his twitch is really controlled. And so it's a long-term play, but I think I don't know. I could argue it's the fourth most fun sort of overall package that the Cubs drafted. And that's always cool to get in the 11th round.
He'll spend this year and next in Mesa working on things for sure. So in the 12th round, we got the Leo meme where he's pointing at the TV and saying, like, we know him. We got Daniel Avitia from Grand Canyon University, who was drafted 2 years ago? 2 years ago.
2021, I think.
2021 draft. Yeah, 2021 draft. The Cubs already have an Avitia. They have David Avitia, the catcher, in the Cubs system right now. So it's fun to see the Cubs go back to Daniel Avitia and draft him there. I made a comment as soon as this draft pick came in. This was the most obvious pick of the entire day, or the entire draft. Like, we knew the Cubs were going to get Daniel Avitia.
I think this is the best pitcher they drafted. I think he's a low arm slot guy that they've liked for a long time. That I think they think that his fastball is really going to play in pro ball because he's going to have that sort of vertical approach angle that is successful. I like him better than Gallagher and Caple. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, he's fun. There, I think Candidates was talking about, or maybe this was an external publication was talking about the pick, and they said he had some kind of first day one buzz, some even first round buzz entering the year, and it just kind of had some injuries, and it again, nothing major. This is the type of thing that the Cubs have targeted, right? Like, in a lesser extent, they did that with Will Sanders last year, which is a guy that was, on the periphery of the first round, second round, kind of a guy that just stuff didn't really click. And then all of a sudden he's just there for you, and you just pop him and you just hope that you get a good outcome on it. But yeah, it felt like an obvious one. So obvious, I didn't even put in the mock because I didn't think anytime I pick the obvious things, they don't do it. And of course they did it. So
it's really a smart play on your part.
Really. There you go. I wanted him. So there you go.
The Cubs in the 13th round drafted Evan Aschenbeck, who is a left-handed pitcher from Texas A&M, one of the better relievers in all of college baseball this past year. His team made it to the College World Series, obviously. Really, really a strong reliever, and a guy that's able to go one inning, able to go multiple innings. He won't be a starter as a pro, I would imagine, but an exciting pick nonetheless.
2 walks per 9 through his 2 years of college, and that dropped to 1.4 this year. Only 12 walks against 87 strikeouts, and so a guy that should definitely have success in A-ball, and so it should sort of cruise his way to AA, which you really like for a pick in this range, and then you sort of see if you can add to it and make it work at that point.
Yeah, Zumach, I expect to see him in AA at some point next year, I'd imagine.
Yeah, seems pretty reasonable. A fastball with a lot of run. He's got a sinker, but it's probably a fastball that's miscategorized, a four-seam that's miscategorized. Gyro slider, so just right down, not a sweeper that's kind of really in vogue. Has a decent changeup, again with a lot of run. Yeah, he's an interesting guy. Like you said, he's just an accomplished college reliever, a cool day 3 pick that you feel like you could get some really good out of.
In the 14th round, the Cubs selected Cameron Sisneros, who is a first baseman from East Tennessee State, which is giving me vibes of the Cubs' 8th round pick in Edgar Alvarez, right? I think they're cut from the same cloth to a certain degree. This past season at East Tennessee State, he actually had more home runs than strikeouts this season, which is always a number that you want to see. Zumach, you got anything on Sisneros?
Yeah, just really limited data, but this is a Mathies pick who, she's really been, I think, getting a lot of organizational support and praise for how deep she digs into players. Not saying that other scouts don't, of course, but she's had a lot of these type of selections in the last 2 years, and so and they've turned out fairly well. Alfonso Rosario, Will Sanders, those kind of things. So a very similar batted ball profile to the things we talked about earlier. Makes contact in the zone, doesn't really chase a ton. Doesn't really chase a ton. Sorry, I'm looking at my data. And then, I just day 3 pick. Hope you hit on it, and kind of cool dude.
Reminds me a little bit of Hayden McGeary in terms of just like absolute video game numbers. And it's worth noting that he went to JUCO in Colorado. So I almost wonder if, the Cubs Colorado area scout would have come across him maybe during the same time that he was scouting McGeary, and kind of wouldn't shock me if they stuck out as 2 of the bigger power hitters in the state at that time, and just sort of ended up in an Excel tab somewhere waiting to get drafted.
In the tab titled Big Dudes Who Rake.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and group these next few picks together. I think that'd be appropriate. We got the 15th, 16th, and 17th round picks. The 15th is Hayden Frank from Lipscomb, who's a left-handed pitcher. The 16th round pick is Christian Gordon, who is also a left-handed pitcher from VCU. And then the 17th round pick is Ben Johnson, who is a right-handed pitcher from Georgia Southern. And I mean, all those guys are starters in college. All 3 are smaller school. I guess VCU is bigger than the other 2, but smaller schools. This feels like the depth that we were kind of hoping that the Cubs would get in terms of pitching in this draft. It's happening right here with Frank, Gordon, and Johnson.
Yeah,
Bryan, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Christian Gordon, I guess, is the one that jumps out to me there. That's the Cubs have a history with some VCU guys, and he's a guy that had success on the summer circuit starting. A guy who just looks like he'll be able to actually sort of start in A-ball, and then you see what happens. And, I like that in the 16th round is like a guy who probably gets a Myrtle Beach rotation slot next year. And looks like this is just like scouting the stat line, but gave up very few home runs in all of college, including summer ball. So, probably a guy that keeps the ball down and throws a pretty good sinker. And you just see what happens here.
Are we talking Gordon?
Yeah.
So Gordon is a weird dude where he's actually like got the Shota fastball type of a style.
Interesting.
Really, high induced vertical break, but a very low approach angle, like negative 4.9, which is not Shota level. I was trying to explain that. I felt like I was making a comp to somebody who had a good reply in the velo, but he does have a sinker though. So I didn't mean to discount what you're saying. I just think he's got he can manipulate the fastball fairly well.
Yeah.
And that's probably key to the success. Yeah. Let me toss out there that really quick. So Frank, is like a 6'6" lefty who throws strikes. That was something that I had passed along to me as a scout. So that's kind of fun. I wasn't able to go too much deeper into that. Ben Johnson was the next pick, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And this is one that jumps out to me because this is not something that the numbers look like anything at all. And this is where I feel like we talk about in baseball, we talk about stuff plus models being used all the time to the point that we get so granular on it that we're talking about like on a pitch by pitch level. So, and this isn't to knock those accounts, but there are people that have accounts to say like, this is the top 10 pitches last night that were thrown in baseball by stuff plus models. I don't think that that's the use of stuff plus models where there's value. I think that where it is taking massive swaths of data, like amateur data, and seeing, whoa, like, hey, this guy, he's got a 6.8 ERA, but he has 4 pitches that have a stuff plus of 108 to 122. And like, there's something there that we're missing. And on day 3, I think that's the appropriate time to do it. And Ben Johnson, I didn't calculate this stuff plus models. This is just passed along to me, but like, that's what he has. And I don't know what the disconnect is at all. I cannot speak to it, but I wonder if this is just an R&D pick that they're like, there's something there. There is something there. And I want 150,000 to mess around with it and just try.
Ben Johnson seems like that late round sleeper pick for you is what it sounds like. Zumach.
Yeah, I like it. Yep.
We're going to end with the 19th round pick. I want to group again the 18th round pick and the 20th round pick kind of together here. We've got in the 18th round, we've got Thomas Mangus from Navarro, community college, a right-handed pitcher. And then we've got Brayden Risedorph in the 20th round, who is a right-handed pitcher from Indiana University. Both those guys are not like, you don't look at them and they're not surefire signs, I would imagine, just because Mangus is coming from JUCO, and I believe that Risedorph is a draft-eligible sophomore, correct? I know he's on the younger end. And so
yeah, that's correct.
I want to kind of group those guys together. I think that Mangus is a guy that I've seen the spin, the high spin fastball is there. It kind of had a little bit higher effort delivery, I thought. It was good mechanics, but it was higher effort, I thought, in a lot of ways. And then with Risedorph, bad numbers at IU, but in the 20th round, if you find something that you can latch onto, might as well pull the trigger, right?
Yeah. So real quick, I mean, I don't feel like we're speaking out of turn. There's been 2 reports out today. I think the Tribune and the Athletic both said that from Dan Kantrovitz. I don't know the exact quote or whatever, but anticipating that all 20 picks will sign. So that's a really good sign. Mangus was the guy, and Risedorph were 2 that I'm like, yeah, I guess there's at least a possibility that we're difficult, because Mangus was going to go to Oklahoma. If he doesn't sign. So not a bad spot for him. He would be a senior, so that's a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, interesting dudes. Again, day 3, if you feel like there's something there, well worth the chance.
Lots of pitchers in this day 3. Lots of pitchers, and I think that's fun.
Yeah, Mangus jumps out to me as just like, if you can get 3 extra miles per hour, then you got something really interesting. And if you can't, then, the opportunity cost wasn't that significant. But yeah, I mean, when you have a spin rate like that, then you start to think like, okay, is there like some sort of Ethan Roberts like unlock that you can do? And if he went to Oklahoma and just dominated as a reliever, then he was a guy that would have gone a lot higher next year. So yeah, I like that pick.
The 19th round pick, and the last guy we'll cover here, was a catcher from Marshall. His name is Owen Ayers, and I think that if you're getting a catcher in the 19th round, he just seems to do everything just fine. Like I think he does a lot of good things, and he put up good numbers this year at Marshall, and that's exactly what you want to get from a catcher in the 19th round.
Yeah, I don't have much on him. I think I even put that on Twitter. I don't know much. I think he's a scouting play and a guy that you just kind of feel like, let's take a dice, roll the dice here. The first selection for Nate Metzger, who's one of the Cubs' new scouts kind of in that area. And so that's kind of a cool thing. He had him and I think Risedorph. So, kind of kudos on that. But otherwise, yeah, I think you just hope you get something out of it.
All right, guys, that is everybody. We've gone through all 20 players from this Cubs draft class. I'll kick it to you guys real quick for just overall thoughts about the draft. It seemed like the Cubs had a very distinct strategy going into this draft in terms of the hitters they were targeting and the pitchers they were targeting. Overall thoughts from the draft, Bryan?
Yeah, I mean, just you mentioned it, like the hitting part of it, I think is the real thing to look at here. The Cubs are hoping for more power into their system, clearly. And I think they got it. I'm going to be really interested. To me, I think the sort of swing pick of the draft is Ronnie Cruz. I just think that's a guy where, when you're in that draft slot and you have some money available, like there's a lot of options available at that time. There's a lot of different players around the country that probably are willing to sign for a pretty similar amount. And so that's the time where you're putting your scouts and their evaluations up against like probably 15 other options that sort of make sense in that spot. And, that's what they're paid to do, is get that pick right. And so I think if this draft goes really well and Ronnie becomes a guy, then like you're going to say, okay, the Cubs out scouted competition there. And if we look back, and this is one of those drafts where like one guy reaches the majors, and the Ronnie Cruz pick will be the one that I think I could listen to people being like, oh, I wish they'd gone this guy here, which I hate that logic, but that's sort of the swing pick to me. And so he's the one that I'm going to just be watching the closest, probably along with Eli Lovich.
I'd echo a lot of that. I think that's this draft will, as all should, will likely be judged on the top 2 rounds. But I think that the area for critique that's not even in hindsight is the Ronnie Cruz pick. And I don't have an issue with it. I agree with what Bryan is saying. Like, there's a real possibility that they've just out scouted other teams that maybe had him in mind a couple rounds later, that the Cubs are just like, this is it. We're taking a chance on upside here. That will be the one that they'll get judged on. And I think the pitching is going to decide this on day 3 in particular, because rounds 3 and 4 were probably the best times that if you did want to take a college arm, you had real possibilities there. And so not like you have to hit all 4 demographics, which actually they can't because it's high school pitching. They didn't even take one. But not that you even need to hit on all hitting and pitching. It's just overall value. But like, that would probably have been the time to take a college arm if you wanted to, or a high school arm. And so, hey, overall I like it. But I think that's probably the inflection point, kind of like what Bryan was saying.
We'll end things by, I want to give you guys the opportunity for 2 guys that are you're most interested in watching. They're the most fun draft picks, your favorite picks. We know that Cam Smith is the best draft pick in this class. Who are the 2 guys that stand out to you as the most fun, the most entertaining? Who are you most excited about? Zumach, I'll kick it to you first.
Yeah, I'm just going to go with the guys that like kind of weirdly stood out, because I think Brethowr is awesome. I think that's an awesome pick. And so if anybody went with that, I think that's totally fine. I'm just going to go with the like, whoa, deeper. I think there's something there picks that stood out to me, and that's Halbach and that's Ben Johnson. I think there's something there that doesn't quite fit with everything, and I'm just excited to see if it's actually true.
Bryan, who you got?
Yeah, I mean, first would be Eli Lovich, because I think the Zaire Hope pick last year stuck out to me as like the best pick in that draft, and Lovich obviously a very different player, much more projection than Hope is, but it's the same type of pick. The Cubs highly prioritize getting one high upside player on day 3, and they very distinctly identified him and have a development plan for him, and I'm fascinated to see how that plays out. Honestly, the other one is Cole Mathis, because if the Cubs have third base as a possibility, and they think that he could, maybe they think he could even play an outfield corner pretty well. Like if he ends up somewhere other than first base, that ends up a better pick, because a lot of people around the country thought that he was a first base only guy. And so I'm really interested to see him move and how the Cubs sort of add some athleticism there.
My 2 picks here are Ivan Brethowr. I just think that I'm just really excited to go watch him hit baseballs. Can't wait for that. And then I'll go with Daniel Avitia, just because he's been on our radars for so long that I'm just really excited to see him actually in the Cubs system. So those are my 2 picks. I'm also I've got a magnifying glass on Ty Southisene. I think that how he develops is going to be so interesting. Like it's going to be a weird development path, I'm sure, for Ty Southisene, and I'm really excited for him. It's more of just like a magnifying glass situation, rather than like I'm just really excited like I am for Evan Brethowr and Daniel Avitia. So
I'll also say that I'm not really a big sort of memorabilia autograph card collector type, but for reasons that I explained on the Northside Bound Draft Show, I will be investing quite some hard-earned dollars and time to get Cam Smith baseball cards and autographs, and that'll be a fun one for my family to root for him coming up and becoming a stud for the Cubs.
That is really fun. All right, guys, we're gonna call it there. We went a little bit longer than expected, but when we went longer than we had hoped. We went about as long as we expected to be, if we're being honest. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys want some more draft content, we did do the live show. I don't know how that listens back, but you can go check it out over on the Northside Bound YouTube channel. You can find us on social media, Bryan at Cub Prospects, Zumach at Ivy Futures, me at Out of the Vines. You can go check out the 1060 West Discord channel. That's super fun. That was super fun during the draft. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll be back in your ears shortly. Not in one short week, but at some point here. I'll keep you guys updated online. So thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Go Cubs.